We have a ton of new news regarding Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, CM Punk, their status with All Elite Wrestling, Punk's seemingly departure on the horizon from AEW, plus Chris Jericho gets in the face of CM Punk after All Out, calls him a cancer. Gone up, down, CM Punk and Steele, have they been approached by WWE? An MGF Babyface turn, Dynamite Ratings, plus another former Ring of Honor champion has been signed to AEW. You're not going to want to miss this episode of AEW News. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, and especially right now, there is plenty of news stories to get into in the world of AEW, with the Elite's return seemingly on the horizon, with CM Punk's departure seemingly in the works from All Elite Wrestling. There is a ton of new information about what is going on, the backstage altercation at All Out, third parties being involved, investigations, confrontations. This is a ton. So you're going to have to bear with me here because there's a lot to get through today. Now, on the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer has stated that the investigation into what happened at All Out, that external third-party investigation, appears to be over, hence why the Elite are on their way back to AEW television, hence why they were backstage this past Wednesday at Dynamite, hence why their returns are being teased on televisions now as well now with these new vignettes. It's also been reported by Wade Keller of the Pro Wrestling Torch that Tony Khan is, quote, siding with Omega and the Bucks more than CM Punk in the fallout from All Out. Now, Keller has also reported that Khan is still interested in Punk from a creative perspective in terms of matches that haven't happened yet, but it would appear that CM Punk is on his way out of AEW. And the reason he's on his way out of AEW is because reportedly the locker room themselves have revolted here. The locker room has decided and passed judgment that CM Punk is not welcome back in All Elite Wrestling. It really does look like we will never see CM Punk inside of an AEW ring ever again. The former AEW World Champion, of course, was last seen blasting his colleagues in the now infamous post-AEW All Out media scrum, a blasting which led to that backstage fight, the brawl out at All Out, which we still don't really know the finer details about, and there's still so many details that are missing, and speculation, and dog teeth being knocked out, and people's wives being in there with broken legs. Biting and hair pulling. It's insane. Now, Punk's friend and trainer Steele, of course, has already been fired by AEW for his part in the brawl, and now it seems almost certain that Punk is set to follow. Writing in this week's edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer has noted that Punk has effectively been, quote, voted out of AEW by his colleagues. This is what he wrote, quote, a few names were mentioned, with Chris Jericho being the name mentioned most, but many, if not most, of the key top names were saying that they wouldn't work with him. One top star noted, Punk won't be back. His value on screen isn't 1% worth the hassle and black cloud he causes backstage. Another top star noted the team has decided he's out, and regardless of some being willing to work with him, the collective decided that he is voted off the island. Of course, this is wrestling. Anything is possible, but it would appear now what had been reported in the past about that largely anti-Punk sentiment is completely accurate, and those top names, the ones that matter, the Chris Jerichos, and we're going to talk about a confrontation between Chris Jericho and CM Punk shortly, but the big names that matter within AEW, Chris Jericho, I can't speculate on what other names there would be, but if you can think of big names within the company, chances are they've had their say on the matter too. They have essentially said, we're not willing to work with him. And I'm sure that Tony Khan, of course, who holds the value in those names very highly and very significantly, that's significant. If you get top names within AEW that are going to Tony Khan and saying, if you bring this guy back, one, I'm out of here, and two, I'm not willing to work with him, that's an issue. I mean, the names on the screen in general, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, they're never going to wrestle CM Punk. They're never going to put their issues aside, clearly. They're not willing to work with him. Then you got people like Chris Jericho, who's a locker room leader. He's just got a new contract. He's assistant with creative. He's a producer. He's saying, I'm not going to work with him. You've then got other people backstage. I'm not willing to work with CM Punk. Then what are you bringing him back for? Because you can't make a lot of money if you can't wrestle matches. So seemingly, the locker room has said, we don't want this guy, he's out. Now, as far as who can talk on the matter, are we ever going to get that infamous shoot interview from CM Punk or the Young Bucks or anything like that. Well, as per Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, there is one person involved present who actually is able to publicly speak about the incident. And that person is Lucy Guy, who is Ace Steele's wife, who reportedly was in the locker room where the brawl took place. Now, of course, Ace Steele, he was fired from AEW recently. He was released due to his involvement in the backstage fight. But Meltzer writes in the newsletter, quote, "To this day, every person either involved or there but one, Lucy Guy, was not allowed to talk publicly. Lucy Guy has not talked publicly, but of all of the people who saw what happened, she is the only one who can publicly at this point give her version of the story. Several others have said they hoped at some point to be able to give their sides of the story, but now with the investigation completed, none are allowed to publicly or privately talk about anything related to the incident." So it would appear we shouldn't be expecting any comments from CM Punk, Ace Steele, the Young Bucks, or Kenny Omega on the incident. Now, time will tell if Lucy Guy does indeed break her silence. I would think of several podcasters or shoot interview companies that would be willing to pay her a lot of money. Could you imagine? It would be the biggest payday of her career. If you could get someone like Conrad Thompson who would be willing to pay that kind of money. Whoever gets that exclusive, bear in mind as well, for the key principal people involved, there isn't an exclusive to get because they can't do it legally. If whoever can get that story out there, that would be absolutely wild. So the other part of that is clearly the key thing with Meltzer writing that everyone involved, now that the investigation is over, can't talk on the matter, suggests, and again, this is speculation on my part, I don't know, but that would suggest that everyone involved here have signed or has agreed to some kind of non-disclosure agreement. Maybe it's a case of when it comes to Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, you're allowed to come back to television, you're allowed to come back to the company, provided you don't talk on the matter. You've signed something to the effect of you're not going to talk on the matter, and the matter's been put in the past. When it comes to CM Punk, logically, you would suggest that as part of the buyout of his contract, which as far as we know is still ongoing, that hasn't been completed. But as far as the buyout of his contract and maybe not having a non-compete clause included in there, might be one of the provisos is you can't talk about the incident, you can't talk about what happened, you can't mention to anyone, you can't do an interview, and you can't say this happened, that happened. Now, what is curious about that is Wrestling Inc. on Wednesday was reporting that exclusive from Punk's camp, and when you hear something from Punk's camp, that's either one, because Punk told Nick Houseman himself, and given the way that they were talking to each other after the All-Out event, that All-Out media scrum, I doubt CM Punk was talking to Nick Houseman, but one, you could certainly argue that he is talking to someone, and someone then is talking to Nick Houseman or Wrestling Inc. or the Dirt Sheets, and they wouldn't do that without Punk's permission. So I don't know if he's breaking that NDA, if he has signed one or if he hasn't signed one. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. This is when we get some new details about what happened right after at All Out that gets absolutely fascinating, and it kind of ties back in to what Meltzer is writing about the AEW locker room reportedly voting CM Punk out of the company, essentially. And one of the locker room leaders that we spoke about previously, of course, is Chris Jericho, the current ROH World Champion, of course, a championship CM Punk held during his career. But Chris Jericho reportedly confronted CM Punk backstage after the incident and had a lot to say to the former AEW World Champion. Now, it's not the first time Jericho in his career has had a backstage confrontation with a major person. He's had history with Brock Lesnar, Goldberg, and now CM Punk. But with the Elite set to return, Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp is reporting a lot more regarding the situation surrounding Brawl Out. Fightful have heard about some of the names that were around during the brawl and who were suspended as they were physically involved, but there were also several other that approached the situation shortly after it had ended. One of those was current ROH World Champion Chris Jericho, who was heavily lauded by those that Fightful had spoken to for his resolve and demeanor stepping up during the scrum right after the incident took place. Of course, Jericho was part of that media scrum. He was there answering questions with Tony Khan, the AEW president, by his side. There's this now infamous clip, of course, where Chris Jericho actually says to Tony Khan, he shakes his hand and he sort of leans in and says, there was some stuff going on. And Tony Khan's like, what? And he's like, there's some stuff going on backstage. And it was because Jericho saw it and he spoke to CM Punk about it as well. Sean Ross Sapp is reporting, Fightful Select is reporting, and they were told by numerous sources that Chris Jericho approached CM Punk unhappy about the altercation and the brawl, as well as the nature of the scrum that had just taken place. So Jericho was fuming on two accounts. One, about the backstage fight, but also two, the way that CM Punk had just bashed the company and the EVPs and a lot of people involved in front of the assembled media at the Now Arena in Chicago. Jericho told CM Punk that he was a cancer to the locker room and a detriment to the company, absolutely chewing him out here, saying you're a cancer and you're a detriment to the company. Now, those that Fightful have spoken to didn't recount CM Punk's reply verbatim, but said that he effectively told Jericho it wasn't his business and needed to leave. Shortly after, Jericho stepped up to appear at the scrum. He also helped lead a talent meeting in the days that followed and signed a significant extension that saw his responsibilities expanded along the way. Now, Fightful reached out to Chris Jericho and AEW for the story, but didn't hear back. Some close to CM Punk, though, did confirm that this interaction took place. So this is absolutely wild. So what basically happened is Jericho is watching CM Punk bash the company in this press conference afterwards. CM Punk then goes back to his locker room. He gets confronted by the Elite. That brawl happens. All this kind of stuff. The skirmish happens. Jericho set to go on, because remember, I think it was Swerve in Our Glory came on after CM Punk. So they're talking. So Jericho's waiting to come on at the press conference. He sees what Punk has to say. He sees the fight. He then confronts CM Punk and says, "You are a cancer to the locker room and you are a detriment to this company." And then goes out and talks normally in front of the assembled media and then tries to tell Tony Khan what was going on. And we really do start to see this extra details of this timeline of what actually was happening going on during this period of time. And to be honest, Jericho, I'm not going to say Jericho's not wrong there, but I think he's absolutely vindicated. If Chris Jericho, as a guy that was part of the founding roster of AEW, as a guy that really helped build this company into what it is today, to see someone come in, be the highest paid guy on the roster, and then rip the company apart in a public forum like he did in the press conference, CM Punk, whether he was valid or not, it was entirely unprofessional, then get into this giant brawl backstage, I'd be pretty livid too. I'd be like, wait a minute, I'm not going to have one guy come here and rip down what I worked really hard building up here. And Jericho stepping up and stepping into the face of CM Punk is just another layer to this story that we didn't know. And certainly, again, leads into what Dave Meltzer is writing there when he's saying, look, actually, you know what? He's one of the names that essentially voted CM Punk out the company. And it's crazy to think. Now, of course, Ace Steele's gone from AEW. CM Punk is still technically there, but it's on his way out. And a report on how CM Punk's friend, trainer, Ace Steele, feels in the aftermath of AEW, the backstage brawl at All Out, has been reported. Now, of course, Ace Steele was recently released from AEW for his involvement in the backstage fight following an investigation into the events. And as per Meltzer in today's Wrestling Observer newsletter, Steele is wishing to put things behind him. Meltzer wrote, quote, "Steele was said to just want to move past this. Was bummed that it happened, and the online harassment of him has been gigantic, although that goes for every person involved in the story. Reportedly, as I mentioned, all those involved in the incident are not allowed to speak, apart from Ace Steele's wife, Lucy Guy." And I would think when it comes to Ace Steele, him saying he wants to just move on from the incident, it's probably because in reality, he's not, this isn't a disrespect to him, but he's not really the one that matters involved here, realistically. And I think if he'd have done it again, or had the opportunity to come again, he'd be like, well, he got involved because his wife was there and he's a friend of Punk, I understand that, but the real focus isn't on him. The real focus is CM Punk, and the real focus is the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. And in reality, not that I sympathize with him because he bit Kenny Omega and pulled his hair and acted like a maniac, but certainly, of anyone to come out of this worse, it's Ace Steele. Ace Steele lost his job. He's fired. I don't know what kind of payoff he got. I don't know if he got one at all. CM Punk is getting actively a buyout negotiated of his contract, so he's going to be paid. The Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, they're coming back to work, so they're going to get paid as well, and they're going to be welcomed back into the AEW locker room. And Ace Steele's the one without a job, and he's the one involved. That doesn't really matter. He's the one that doesn't really matter, and it isn't really the focus of everything. And he got tied up into an incident that initially he didn't have a lot to do with. So I can understand why he'd want to move on and why he'd hope to get this whole situation in front of him. Now, of course, with all of this going on with CM Punk and Steele, there has been speculation that both could ultimately join WWE following their respective AEW departures. Meltzer once again has written in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, there has been no communication between WWE and Punk or Steele in the last few days. Meltzer wrote, quote, "As for other updates, as of the last word we have, there have been no communication between WWE with either Punk or Steele as of several days ago. Legally, there still couldn't be with Punk since he was still under contract to AEW. There is no indication one way or the other of Paul Levesque or Nick Khan's feelings on the matter, and it's very tricky for obvious reasons." So what is interesting with the Punk WWE side of things is I think it was WrestleVotes in an interview with Give Me Sport yesterday essentially said that Triple H wanted nothing to do with CM Punk and even less to do with Phil Brooks. Dave Meltzer saying, well, actually, we don't really know what Triple H's feelings are on CM Punk. We don't really know what his feelings are on bringing Punk back to the company. Of course, it feels like it's unlikely, but, he hasn't heard anything and he doesn't know. As I said yesterday, I don't think you can rule it out because you can't rule anything out in pro wrestling. So I have to wait and see. It's not going to happen anytime soon because, of course, still technically he's under contract to AEW and, of course, he's injured as well. So we can't wrestle for 9 months anyway, so we shouldn't expect anything to happen when it comes to WWE way down the line. Steele, WWE's got a lot of producers anyway, so I'm not sure that will really happen too much. Now, as far as a what-if scenario, of course, Marvel's got their show, What If? So what if this hadn't happened? What if this hadn't happened and CM Punk was still in the company and CM Punk didn't get injured as well? Because, of course, even if the incident and the altercation didn't happen after All Out, and even if CM Punk didn't say what he said at the press conference, CM Punk wouldn't be able to wrestle anyway because, of course, he tore his tricep. He's out of action. But Dave Meltzer has provided an update as to what the plans were for CM Punk moving forward in AEW had he not been injured and had the incident not taken place. The feud was, as expected, for CM Punk and MGF to feud in the main event, with more, quote, classic promo battles planned ahead of their title match. Meltzer writes, quote, "Danielson, Punk were back and then Omega came back and things did not jump back up immediately, but for Punk and Omega, they barely got their feet wet. The hope was to revive Punk versus MGF and have the classic promo battles plus all the great undercard action. I don't think things would have been back to September 2021 no matter what, but they also didn't have to be at that level to thrive as a company going forward. Of course, now, MJF will now challenge Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship at Full Gear in November. So the plans were, as expected, Punk to face MJF. And to his point, you would have had this undercard. That would have been very strong. Thing is, I'm not sure if AEW is ever going to get back to the momentum they had in September of 2021. And that's a shame because it felt somewhat fumbled. There was an opportunity there. They had their moment and it didn't work out. Now, because of that, AEW isn't going to fail and AEW isn't going away anytime soon because of that. But to Meltzer's point, they had their moment in time. They didn't really capitalize on it. And now they are where they are, where it's about 1 million viewers every week for Dynamite and TBS. And that's about it. And now they've got to recover from this PR disaster that has been CM Punk's final days in AEW. Now, speaking of MJF, of course, this week it looked like MJF had turned babyface on Dynamite, didn't it? And there's been a lot of discussion about won't he turn into a good guy on television? And according to Brian Alvarez on the latest Wrestling Observer Live, there are people within AEW who, quote, strongly believe MJF should be a babyface going forward, to the point where some believe MJF has the potential to be a generational babyface in the pro wrestling business. Alvarez added that AEW's creative team remains conflicted about going all the way with an MJF babyface turn, with the idea that the firm portraying MJF on Dynamite could be part of an elaborate swerve. At this point, AEW is reportedly not adamant about keeping MJF as a heel, as evidenced by MJF's refusal to disparage the crowds in recent weeks. Previously, MJF would regularly come out and just bury the town, even before live tapings, to try and elicit a negative reaction, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, of course, it was mentioned previously by Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio that MJF would prefer to remain as a heel. But as I've said several times in recent weeks and recent shows here when we've spoken about this, I agree. I agree with the sentiment. He can be truly a generational babyface, but the execution has to be right. The execution has to be key. He has to do what Stone Cold Steve Austin did and The Rock did when they turned into babyfaces in the late 1990s, which was do nothing. The Rock, look at The Rock. They did everything possible to ensure The Rock was booed. In 1998, 99, they did everything they could, or late 97, 98, they did everything they could to ensure The Rock was booed. They even had the swerve turn where he started to get cheered by the audience because he was so popular, and he still turned heel, and he still joined the corporation. But they couldn't keep him down because the crowd wants to cheer him. It's the same with MGF. MGF's fun. He's entertaining. The crowd wants to cheer him. The key thing is he can't pander to the audience. He can't suddenly come out and do babyface promos of good guys and hustle, loyalty, and respect. He cannot do that. The key of the execution for MGF to be a babyface is to do nothing. The only thing that has to change is the opponent. MGF still runs down his opponent. Just this time now, his opponent's a heel. He still calls out the crowd and all that kind of stuff. Maybe he doesn't completely disparage them, but nothing really changes that much. That's the key thing here, and it's the biggest mistake in pro wrestling. They do it every time. Someone gets popular and over as a heel, so they go, right, turn him into a babyface, and suddenly they don't like to cheat anymore. Suddenly, they don't like to run down their opponent. Suddenly, they're friends with everyone. No! Be a babyface where you're like, I'm still a bad guy. I'm just facing heels now. That's the easiest thing to do. And that would be, in my opinion, the best way to execute a babyface turn for MJF, which I can think is possible. He can carry the company, no doubt about it. Now, speaking of Dynamite this past Wednesday, they're back to the numbers that they were doing previously. Wednesday's Dynamite, according to WrestleNomics, was viewed by 997,000 people on average. That's up a hefty 33% from the previous week. The key demographic also followed suit. The program was watched by 417,000 viewers aged 18 to 49, which is up 23% from last Tuesday. This accrued a total of a 0.32 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. Dynamite ranked number 5 in the key demographic on cable originals. And in broadcast primetime, Wednesday's episode placed 17. Of course, the show did battle an NBA game for eyes, which was always going to be difficult, so they've always got that competition. Looking back on last year's episode, there's some good and bad news for the program. Last year's airing had a total audience of 941,000 viewers, pitting Wednesday's episode up 6% over 2021. However, it was down this year in the key demographic. Last year's audience had 518,000 in the 18 to 49 demographic, nearly 100,000 more than this week's episode, signaling a 20% drop and a 0.40 rating. So I'll be glad they're back up to those numbers. Obviously, again, less competition, not on the same night as another pro wrestling program, and still sports competition, but less sports competition. Again, that's I think at this point, that's Dynamite's number. It's around 1 million. Around 1 million, maybe just below, maybe just over, but it's around 1 million every single week. And to my point earlier on, when they were back in September, not that they were doing exponentially better, but that's who's going to tune in now. Dynamite's, unless they do something that gets people's attention, that's the number that's going to tune in. And they have to find a way to improve on that. Finally, we've got another signing in AEW, another former ROH signing. And former ROH Pure Champion Josh Woods has, of course, now signed with AEW. Woods has recently been teaming with Tony Nese. They recently challenged for the Acclaim's AEW Tag Team Championship on the October 21 edition of Rampage. And per Fightful Select, Woods has now signed a multi-year, full-time contract with AEW. He'd previously been working on a tiered deal, but now he is full-time with the company. So there you go, another signing for AEW. And there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on AEW's news stories there in the comment section below, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right-hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.